Welcome to the Board of Education meeting. Today is Monday, October 1st. Before we move forward with the meeting, I just have a little housekeeping to take care of. The Open Public Meeting Statement, in accordance with the requirements of the Open Public Meeting Act, Chapter 231, PL 1975 announcement, I wish to announce that the New Jersey Open Public Meeting Law was enacted to ensure the right of the public to have advance notice of and to attend the meetings of public bodies at which any business affecting their interest is discussed or acted upon. In accordance with this provision of this act, the School District of the Chatham Board of Education has caused notice of this meeting to be published by having the date, time, place thereof posted at the Board Administrative Offices, sent to the clerks of the Chatham Borough, Chatham Township, Library of the Chathams, the Chatham Courier, the Daily Record, the Star Ledger, and the TAP. Mr. DeQuilla, would you mind doing a roll call?
Ms. Chambers? Yes. Ms. Ciccarelli? Ms. Clark? Yes. Ms. Kenny? Yes. Mr. Ryan? Here. Mr. Valenti? Here. And Ms. Weber?
Here.
7 present and accounted for.
Excellent. If you're able, can you please stand and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance? The flag, I believe, is over on this side. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have a lot to get to, so I do not want to spend too much time on opening comments for the board president. I will have comments later after discussion. I did want to give a shout out to Mrs. Gilfillan. It is her 80th birthday today, which is why Matt is not joining us. So a quick shout out, happy birthday to Mrs. Gilfillan. It also happens to be my mother's birthday, but we celebrated yesterday. So happy birthday to both moms. Just to remind the board members, Mr. Henderson pointed out to me last week that if you can, when you're speaking, to get fairly close to the microphone. He'll adjust it over there, but so they don't have to play too much with the levers. Please, get fairly close to the mic. Don't lean back if you can avoid it.
Can they give us a signal if they can't hear?
Sure. Colin, just wave if you can't hear us or if you need us to adjust. Just yell out a little hoot, a little holler, and we'll adjust. Or Shane, sorry, who's ever on sound? Shane? Okay, Shane will do it. He's on the right in the blue shirt. Okay, perfect. So we're still working out some of the kinks of our new location, so bear with us. So without further ado, I'm going to pass this over to Dr. LaSousa. If anybody doesn't know, this gentleman here in the blue suit is our superintendent of schools. So he's going to do a presentation, and unless you're going to see my big head, I'm going to have to step away. If the board members want to pick a spot that is, best advantageous for them, get wherever you're comfortable.
All right. Connor, is this loud enough for the room? Do you have amplification in the room? You guys don't mind my back, right? Better? All right. Okay. Still no. It's coming through? Okay. Bear with us. We're still getting used to our new accommodations here. Thank you all very much for coming tonight. We appreciate you being here. And obviously, the bulk of this meeting is going to be spent talking about school security, school safety, and finally the recommendation that I have to our board to employ Class 3 officers full-time in the district. So I'm happy to say that we're joined tonight by members of our 2 police departments, Chatham Borough, Chatham Township. We have Chief Brian Gibbons and, thank you, Brian, and Chief Tom Miller, and they're super good friends of the school district. We go back many, many years to times when none of us were in the positions that we're currently in. And I know that our principals, who also are in the audience tonight, really appreciate the work, the working relationship that we have with both the borough and the police department. So I'm speaking for myself as superintendent throughout this presentation, not necessarily speaking for either of the chiefs or anyone on our Board of Education individually. So I'm going to just move through the presentation as quickly as I can so we have plenty of time for questions and answers, and our police chiefs can weigh in on whatever they think appropriate. And the presentation is essentially divided into 3 parts. First is just a general context setting overview of school safety and security, at least as it pertains to us here in New Jersey. Second part is more about what we've been doing in Chatham over the past few years. And then finally, the recommendation to move forward with Class 3 officers. So I was fortunate enough to go away and receive some training this summer with Marco Fryer, who is our assistant principal at Lafayette Avenue School. He's in the back in the yellow tie. And we went to the training at the Morris County Fire and Police Academy. They had a whole host of experts there, from state police to local law enforcement agencies to members of the Department of Education. And they took us through the latest in school safety and security. So one of the things that they spoke with us about was how New Jersey has responded over the years to the tragedies that have received the most national attention. So sometimes when we talk about school safety and security or Class 3 officers, we probably focus in too much on school shootings because they're exceedingly rare. They're not likely to happen. But nonetheless, they've had the effect of affecting policy. And that's certainly true in New Jersey. So over the years, you probably will recognize some of the names on the screen on the left there, except maybe the Chechen siege in Russia, but that actually had an impact on how the state of New Jersey and law enforcement agencies issued their recommendations to us about how to prepare for a significant event. Prior to that, as an example, we didn't think so much about what it would be like if all of our staff and students had to be here for a prolonged period of time without being able to leave the building. But that's something that made its way into the plans that we currently use. So in New Jersey, believe it or not, even though Columbine took place in 1999, it really wasn't until a number of years after that that the state began fomenting recommendations and guidance and rules that affected us and that were explicit in terms of what the directive or the direction was that they were looking at. And as I showed on that last slide, Virginia Tech, of course, got a lot of attention, and Sandy Hook was a game changer in terms of understanding school safety and security because it was really one of the first massive tragedies that impacted elementary level schools as opposed to primarily high schools and middle schools. So the DOE kind of followed suit. 2006 issued a series of recommendations and a manual that we all could consult and implement as school districts. It updated the MOA, which is a statewide agreement that school districts must enter into with their local law enforcement agencies. I'll talk more about that in a couple of minutes. And 2015 was the next real push at the DOE at the state level, and that was the result of Sandy Hook. After Sandy Hook, the Department of Education with the Department of Homeland Security partnered up, and they took to studying incidents of school violence and how they could issue recommendations to school districts throughout the state. And that work culminated in a 2015 task force report. And that task force report was also the reason why Marco and I attended training this summer. That was one of the results of that work. In Chatham, and Mr. Groh and I have been in the high school or around the high school for a long time, so probably longer than we care to admit. But when we first arrived here, for example, the doors weren't being locked to the exterior. The exterior doors of the school were not being locked. We had a senior entrance down near the parking lot near the L wing. We had the main entrance, and I remember when we started to lock the doors, it was almost an obscene statement to the kids that we would make them walk from the lower parking lot up to the main entrance, and they'd lose time and couldn't get back from open campus quickly enough. But it just gives you an idea about how much has changed in just 15 years or so since we've been working as administrators at the high school. So I can still recall in 2005, Mr. Groh and I were assistant principals here, in essence, beginning to drill with the Chatham Township Police Department on a Saturday for an active shooter drill. Wasn't until 2007 that we installed a buzzer at the front doors of our schools. That was just before Virginia Tech. 2012 is when we installed surveillance cameras. 2013 is when we hired our current security staff members, and we have two of them, at least two that I see with us tonight, Frank Wolf, who's over at the middle school, and Chris Tomeno at the high school. And of course, since that time, we've been trying to improve what we do every year to make sure that our students are safe and secure. So I'll just quickly touch on 4 areas that we try to be cognizant of, try to make sure that we're doing everything we're supposed to. So one area is personnel. In addition to the security staff that we have in each school building, we also have an ongoing working relationship with the borough police and the township police. And some of you might know this in the audience, but some of you might not. Our police officers are in our schools quite frequently. And it's not just when we have an emergency like we had at the middle school on Friday, when we had a couple of borough police with us for a half hour, an hour while we had to evacuate the building. But for at least a decade now, we have requested actively that whenever their officers have time on their patrols, that they come into the schools, that they walk the building, that they come in the high school, for example, and walk the lunch hour, talk to students, talk to staff. We want the police to have a presence in the schools as much as they're able to. We also have established a relationship with the county, and that was something that wasn't really so much in existence before Hurricane Sandy. Now we have ongoing alerts from the county. We have state and county informational bulletins that we get, and all of the administrators in our district have been to the county OEM to get a feel for the layout of that facility. We've increased the number of our mental health professionals in the district. I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. And we also have anti-bullying specialists in all of our schools and school safety teams. In terms of the physical plant, and I was reflecting as I put this slide together, other than the AEDs that you see on the 4th or 5th bullet, none of this was in place 10 years ago. So now we have a card access system for all district employees to access the schools. We have surveillance system. We have kits and tools for emergency situations in all of our classrooms. We have a 2-way intercom system in all classrooms so that someone who's in a classroom can call out for help to the rest of the building. And we have a numbering system for all classrooms and points of egress. And I just want to point out that I'm not getting into too much detail here deliberately because law enforcement folks tell us not to get into too much detail when we talk about these kinds of things. In terms of our procedures and our response protocols, we have what we call an options-based protocol, meaning that in addition to locking down if we have a situation unfolding, we have other options that we may exercise to ensure the safety and well-being of students. And we drill with the police frequently, not always, but with the police. We're required as a public school district to have one fire drill like you all experienced when you were kids a month, but also one safety-related drill, not related to fire, but rather active shooter, bomb threat, shelter in place, that kind of thing. We update our policies on an ongoing basis, and we also pay attention to our landscaping, which is something that experts have told us to do, meaning that you don't want ready access to roofs from trees. You don't want shrubs to be overgrown where someone could conceal something. So we try to, take all of that into account. And then we have processes in place where we can revisit this stuff or visit it, talk it through, discuss how we can improve. So like I mentioned before, we have an annual meeting, the police chiefs and the superintendent, where we review the memorandum of agreement. We also have a wider network that we've informally established with New Providence Summit and Berkeley Heights. All of those superintendents and police chiefs get together on an annual basis, and we talk about what's going on, what we're each doing, how to get better, make sure that we are on the same page if there's an incident in one district and that could affect or spill into the other or into the rest somehow. We had a third-party assessment conducted on all of our school facilities in 2013 by a member of the Department of Homeland Security, and that resulted in a number of recommendations and ways we could improve. We've been trying to implement as much of that as we can, still more to go. Some of it is costly, some of it is more like low-lying fruit, so we've been picking away at that. We're required by law on an annual basis to review our school safety plans at each school, and in fact, just last week we had a meeting with all of the safety-related personnel, administrators, a couple of mental health folks, police, to do just that. And then finally, Marco and I, like I said, attended the School Safety Academy training this past summer. So moving forward, and obviously I'll focus on the last bullet, but I'll just mention that aside from Class 3 police officers, we try to improve what we do. We try to talk through how we drill, what the most appropriate response is in a given situation. And we also try to continually invest in the facilities to make sure that they're safe, and we're doing everything we can to try to account for potentially dangerous or threatening situations for our students. So let me go to the main matter at hand here, the Class 3 police officers. So as I said, after Sandy Hook, the state convened a task force. It was established by the legislature. The task force was composed of folks from the Department of Homeland Security, Department of Education, and law enforcement agencies. And they took a couple of years and then published their report in the summer of 2015. There are many recommendations in the report. Some of them we were already doing. Some of them we've been striving to do. One of the recommendations was to place SROs, that stands for School Resource Officer, in all school buildings in New Jersey. There was a problem with doing that, however, and the problem was that school resource officers are full-time, full-blown police officers who earn a police officer's salary, who are part of the police officer's pension system, who have health benefits just like any other police officer. And having an SRO put into every school facility in New Jersey would have been far too costly for most school districts, ours included. So what the legislature did after receiving that task force report was work in a bipartisan manner and work with Governor Christie to create a different class of police officers that would be available to school districts and municipalities. And what they created was a Class 3 officer position, which mirrors a Class 2 officer position, which of course our chiefs can speak to better than I can. But the idea with a Class 3 police officer is that it's a police officer who very recently has retired from the system and agrees to serve in this capacity and reassumes policing authorities in the school district in which the municipality is located. So it's a way to create a school resource officer at a reduced cost for districts and municipalities. Many, many districts, we're probably in the minority of school districts with a high school that have not had a school resource officer. As Mr. Groh will tell you from his visits to other school districts and visiting other high schools in the NJAC and in our conference and so forth, most other high school districts have at least a police officer present at all times. We have not been there yet. Since the Class 3 officer position was created, many, many, many school districts are now moving forward with Class 3 officers. I was just at my own back-to-school night for my own kids about a week and a half ago. I'm Chester, the second bullet there. They're putting in place a Class 3 officer this month, and they're putting in a school resource officer hopefully sometime in January. So many of the districts are moving in this direction. Class 3 officers receive special training, meaning you don't just handpick any person from a police force, or the chief wouldn't handpick any person at random and plunk them in a school. They're carefully selected. They go through specialized training as school resource officers, and they're willing and eager to participate in community-based policing, getting to know individuals, and working as a team with school districts. And they're also certified to do things like teach lead and driver's education and probably CPR and things like that. So I hear a lot of concerns, and some of you in the audience have shared those concerns with me, about Class 3 officers or police of any kind. So I'm just going to touch on like three or four of them really quickly. So the most common statement I have been hearing is, I don't want guns in the schools, right? And believe me, there's no person more empathetic and sympathetic to that statement than yours truly, okay? I don't believe in firearms in a school setting. I don't believe in arming teachers. Some of you I know in the audience disagree with that. I don't believe in arming teachers. I don't believe in arming our principals. I don't believe in arming folks who have retired as police officers 10 years before. However, we have 4 guns in our school right now. They're in the holsters of these guys. And every day when we have police come into our schools, they have guns. They don't lock their gun in their car or leave it in a box someplace in their patrol car. They have guns. I'm comfortable with that. We're accustomed to the police being in our schools. We want them in our schools more. So the question isn't, do you favor guns in the school or not? Most people would not want firearms or weapons of any kind in a school setting, including me. Right now, we have firearms in our school in the holsters of police officers. 10 minutes here, an hour there, 35 minutes this day when the police come in or are meeting with us for whatever other reason. The question really is, do we want to continue to operate like that, or do we want a police officer present all of the time? I want a police officer present, more than one police officer present, all of the time. Next concern I hear sometimes is that police might have the effect of altering the school climate, making kids feel uneasy. And to be honest with you, I think 20 years ago I was probably in this camp. Maybe even 15 years ago I was in this camp. I'm not in that camp anymore. Number one, I see our students. I see them walk by the police that are in our schools. I asked a couple of our kids just at the end of the meeting last time, how do you feel when police are here? One of them piped up right away, makes me feel safer. I believe that the students, you'd be surprised, especially in the wake of incidents like Parkland, how comfortable they do feel with police officer presence. And if they don't right now, one of the very positive byproducts of having police around more often is that kids will feel more comfortable with police. And I think that that's a good thing. And I can tell you, and I know it's either apples and apples or apples and oranges, depending on how you see it, but when we first put in the red shirts, as some people call them, our current security staff, some folks voiced the same concern to me. In fact, a number of parents. It's going to change the tone of the building if you have a security officer, security monitor in the front hallway all of the time. We polled kids at the end of that year, and the majority of students in each of the 6 schools said that they felt safer as a result of seeing the security person. And again, if the Board of Education were to go down this path, and if the municipalities were able to secure and identify a Class 3 officer in each municipality, our police chiefs would be very careful in scrutinizing those folks and making sure that they are a good fit for the district. Another concern I've heard is that we don't want kids who are sneaking a cigarette in the bathroom, as wrong as that is, to wind up, in the criminal justice system. And our police chiefs have told me they don't want a Class 3 officer dealing with that kind of stuff. In fact, they don't want anything to change. They don't want any current practice that we have when we reach out to the police to talk to them about a concern that we have, or when we find a kid who's doing something he or she shouldn't. We should act in exactly the same way. We don't rely on a Class 3 police officer to carry out the law inside the school. That's not the job of a Class 3 officer. In addition, I'll mention something that we learned this summer, which was when New Jersey was building its school resource officer training program, it took into account concerns that groups like the ACLU had about criminalizing kids or putting them in a criminal justice pipeline. And some of the components of the training and some of the way the law is designed around school resource officers, Class 3 officers, takes that into account to avoid putting kids in a school-to-prison pipeline, as some people have written. Some folks say we should be focusing on education, the mental health needs of our students. Couldn't possibly agree with this statement anymore, and we've been doing that. We've been investing in that. We've increased the number of the mental health staff we have in this district over the past 5 years and continue to do so. And we've been trying to do it through the curriculum as well. So why why a school, why a Class 3 officer? And I'm not naive or delusional. I don't think that if we have a Class 3 officer or even a police chief or lieutenant here right now, that means that it's impossible that anything bad would ever happen, or that that automatically means there couldn't be a school shooting that would take place here. Obviously, that's a preposterous notion. There are no guarantees, and there are school shootings that we can find out there where school resource officers have been present, and we can find ones where they haven't been present. But I do believe that police officers help keep people and venues safer. That's like the mantra of police, is to protect and to serve. This is why, if I were lucky enough to get a ticket to see the Yankees play in the playoffs next week, there are a lot of police around. It doesn't mean that a crime won't be committed at Yankee Stadium, but there's a reason why police are present in venues where there are large groups of people congregated. Whether it's a museum or an athletic venue or a concert hall, police helped to provide safety. So to just give some context to that, Cougar Weekend's coming up at the end of this month. I hope you all attend. We usually have about 2,000 people each night on Cougar Weekend. And at a minimum, we have 4 police officers present at Cougar Night. Minimum. We have more than 2,000 people in this facility we're sitting in every single day, all day long. Between Lafayette and the high school, we have about 2,200 human beings. 2,000 of them are kids. It's not unreasonable. In fact, I think it's unreasonable not to have a police officer present when we have that many people congregated at one spot. In terms of just relative, numbers, and these are arbitrary data points that I just, picked out of my head, but a fifth of all the people in these 2 towns are in the school system every single day. There are roughly 18,000 and change, or 19,000 people in Chatham Borough, Chatham Township combined. All of Harding Township, every human being who lives in Harding Township, that's fewer people than are in our schools every day, just kids, not even counting the adults that are in the school system. We send our kids off to a lot of colleges. I always pick on Gettysburg because that's where I went. But the student population at Gettysburg is 2,400. We're 50–60% bigger here in the district. And of course, no college is without a safety and security team in this day and age. So my explicit recommendation or proposal is to consider hiring 1 Class 3 officer in the borough, because Class 3 officers are bound to their municipality. They can't leave one municipality and go to another, not even here in Chatham. So we'd hire 1 in the borough and 1 in the township. The 1 in the borough would be based at the middle school. The 1 in the township would be based here at the high school. But part of their responsibilities would be to get to the other schools. Just like now, we have our patrols and we have officers patrolling our schools when they can. We'd want their presence to be known and felt as often as is reasonable in the other schools. But they would be based here. And Class 3 officers, just like any police officer, report to the police chiefs. They don't report to the superintendent or the principal. But I know these chiefs well, and we've discussed this. And if we were to move down this road, they'd be very much collaborative in terms of the expectations of these folks, how they're performing, if things are going the way we want, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of the summary. These gentlemen are here for a reason, and that is so that our Board of Education members, and I'll turn it over to Jill to kind of manage the rest of this component of the meeting, but they and I are happy to answer any questions that you might have, and we'll go from there. And we have to share a mic. I don't think it's working.
Mrs. Ciccarelli present. Excellent. I can't believe you made your flight from Wake Forest. That's amazing. Thank you, Dr. LaSousa. I appreciate your thorough presentation. I don't know, I thought you had told me a bill of goods. You said it would be 5–7 minutes tops, or did I misunderstand you? Chief Gibbons, Chief Miller, first of all, thank you very much for coming here. I know you've had a busy day, and this is just a tremendous that you're able to come and answer our questions. I also want to say congratulations to both of you, recent police chiefs. And thirdly, I'd like to say thank you and your staff for protecting our students and staff every single day, because I know you and your fellow officers are the people that are running toward the gas main break. You're running toward the domestic violence. You're running toward where our children are, helping them out. So thank you from the bottom of our hearts, and collectively that's for the entire community. I just wanted to, would you like an opportunity to speak in a kind of summary fashion before we ask questions, or would you just like us to ask questions and maybe go from there? It's certainly, you let us know if you have a preference. He covered everything? Okay, perfect. Then typically, just so everybody knows, typically we, the board will ask questions, and when there's a large vote or an item of significance opinion, we typically start at the ends and work our way in. Newest board members to, those of us that are long in the tooth and have been here probably far too long. But as a courtesy to our newer members, if you don't mind, I'd like to just start and give them a few minutes. If I could just start, and maybe if you can answer a few questions on two topics that I'm most curious about is, if you could talk about response time, the advantages to response time to having one of your officers on location or in a campus. And then a second follow-up question to that would be the advantages and to community policing and getting the students, to build a rapport with your officers and with your departments as a whole. So either one, if you wouldn't mind. And then I'll start at the ends just to give Mrs. Chambers and Mr. Ryan a moment.
Well, I can tell you in regards to response time, having an officer in the school. I don't think this is working.
Mike Lasusa, is that mic any better?
Check 1, 2. Check.
Mr. Henderson, is it possible to turn up the PA system in the back, the speaker system, or Shane, I don't know if you have control of that?
Can you hear through their microphone?
I can hear.
Okay.
And if it's not your job, Shane, just say, not my job, it's Mr. Henderson's.
Mr. Henderson.
There you go. It's called delegation.
Yeah.
Testing, can you hear me?
Yes.
I can comment on response time. Response time would be pretty much instantaneous with somebody here. He would communicate via our two-way radio system instead of going through the 911 system, which could take a minute to get to the call taker and then dispatch through to our officers. So response time would pretty much be instantaneous.
I agree. And without question, the response time from the officers, even in the municipality, is exceptional. So even today, without the Class 3, we do have an exceptional response time if there is a major incident. But I do agree with Chief Miller that having an officer on scene would allow for immediate notification to command and immediate notification to the additional officers and to the communication center, which saves a lot of time, and the time is of the essence. Secondly, regarding the community services component, without question, that is one of the most profound aspects of an SRO, successful SRO program. And that's why during our conversations with Dr. Lasusa and with the safety planners, we have made it clear that, an officer in the school, whether it's a Class 3 or an officer responding to the school, that we do not want the officers to be disciplinarians, that we want the officers to be friends with these students, to watch out for them, to secure their safety, and to create a relationship with them so they feel most comfortable speaking with them about the potential issues that we need to know about in advance. I think it's important to note that these are all layers of protection, and I agree with any layer of protection that puts safety first with children, but I think the greatest degree of protection is the intelligence that we get, that we can garner from the students, from the parents, from the teachers, and the rest of the colleagues, and the community. So it is important that they have that relationship so they can work on that relationship and actually prevent issues before they ever become a major incident at a school. That's the goal.
Thank you. If I could just follow up on the response time question. Tactically, I have to assume there's advantage tactically if there's an officer in the hall, and there's many hallways. If you've ever been to back to school night, it can get a little hairy here. I have to, I don't want to assume, but if there's an incident, even if it's a medical incident, or there's a parent who has a restraining order against them and they're trying to get into the L wing, and there's some violence down there, is there advantage, not just response time that you have a radio, but you can communicate back which wings you can clear, which wings have to be locked down? Currently, we just have to lock everybody down regardless of where the incident is. Is there some advantages, from a tactical point of view as well?
I would say certainly there is. Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm just gonna, I'm sure I'll have follow-ups, but Ms. Chambers, if you don't mind, I'll start with you, and then I'll flip over to Mr. Ryan, and then just back and forth.
Okay, I actually have a couple questions. So thank you so much for coming to speak with us tonight. This is definitely something that we've been talking over since the recent shooting. So we really appreciate your time, and congratulations. I had a couple questions about the scope of work. And who would define that? Would you be working with the administration and the principals to define what the job description of this officer would be, and who would be responsible for the review and goal setting and that kind of thing? It's more of a, not a safety issue, but just a protocol thing.
Well, it would be a collaborative effort with us and the administrators.
It's actually the other mic, so you have the longer. 1, 2. Yep. Hello.
It's working. Yep.
It would absolutely be a collaborative effort between the police chief, myself, and Chief Gibbons. But primarily, my scope of work for my Class 3 would be the safety and security of the staff and the students. That's his primary duty.
I'd just like to add that I think the policy would be developed, and they would certainly be answering to the chiefs and that chain of command from the police department. That's critical. But the policy should be developed in cooperation with the school district. And the principals should certainly have input into that. And the policy should be written in a way that allows for the principals of the school to offer suggestions and direction to the officer, so long as it meets the mission of that policy and it meets the mission of the police department. So as long as it's appropriate and legal and it falls within the confines of the policy, then it would be most appropriate for even the principal to be speaking directly and asking favors of the SRO or the Class 3 to respond.
So we're in the process of developing those kind of things as we move forward with this process? Because I'm assuming those aren't in stone yet, right? They are not. So we would also, could we or should we include in that some sort of internal conflict mechanisms and reporting, not only for administrators and staffs and volunteers, parents and students, to include that in any discussions that you have when you're developing those policies?
Yes, I've read policies that exist regarding this, and they actually already have that written in there.
Right.
It's pretty standard for those types of policies, so the answer is yes.
So you guys would kind of meld them? Would we have to readdress them, you think? Or is it something that you guys would work to so that both would be like working parallel to each other?
I'm not sure if I understand your question.
Oh, okay.
If working in developing the policy with the school district?
Yes.
I think that would be most appropriate.
Excellent. And I have one other question that's a little different. Being that you'll be on the school grounds and in charge of securing the situation, how much information of the students are you going to be privy to or want access to? I guess the way I'm leaning is that if we have students that have special needs, or would you want to know that? Would that be part of the thing? Like, because students react differently to different situations. So I was wondering if that was going to be part of the conversation too. Would we allow the officers to help them identify these students? Or is that something that we've got to work on as we move forward? Okay. Okay. Excellent. Thank you. If I have another one, I'll let you know. But thank you so much. I appreciate it. Just logistics.
Mr. Ryan?
Yes, thank you, gentlemen, for coming, and congratulations. I just have a couple of questions related to Parkland in particular. I don't know if you want to answer these questions, but I think we're all kind of struggling with what happened there, given that there were officers on site at that building. So if you can, as much to the extent that you can, explain what your opinion is, or tactically what happened in that situation that made these officers ineffective in stopping that situation.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll give an opinion on that. I don't want to Monday night quarterback what happened down there. That's up to you.
No, I don't have much opinion about what happened. I don't know why they did what they did, or why they didn't respond and enter the school. So it's difficult without having the inside track. I can tell you that our policy would be for officers to enter the school and to confront that threat immediately. And studies have shown that the faster you confront it, the quicker it ends. And in fact, studies have shown that most of these cases actually end before the police even arrive, vast majority. But having an officer on scene or having officers respond immediately, it would be, that's the evolution of these types of shooting incidents now. Years ago in Columbine, there was a reluctance to enter, and there was more of a training that emphasized surround and tactically call out special teams, SWAT teams that you're, or emergency services units. Today, that's sort of been spun around a bit. So the emphasis would be on encountering that threat immediately.
So tactically, our officers would be instructed to engage
Exactly.
the situation? Okay. Another question would be in that regard, if we have a significant mental health crisis in the district, I'm not saying we do, you might know more about that than we do, would that create a situation where, you know, the school system or the school that has an officer in it actually becomes a convenient target for a desperate student who is on the verge of suicide and does not want to do it himself or herself?
Well, I could tell you this much. I read articles from publications all over the country. Regardless of whether we're in a school or not, police are active targets in almost every state in the country, and it's something we live with every day, and it's something that you have to confront when you put on the uniform every day. Do I think that that could exist? It's possible, yeah. But
So potentially it could increase the likelihood.
I don't know if it, I think that would be a bit of an extreme overstatement, frankly. I don't think it would increase the likelihood. The likelihoods exist that we are targets. I don't think it would increase it at a school.
Okay, so what are the...
Meaning I don't think it would bring trouble to the school. Do I think the police officer could be a target? Yes. I don't think it would bring more trouble to the school.
So the statistics on, I'm sorry, go ahead, sir, if you were going to respond. Just in general, the statistics on suicide by cop versus a school shooting. What does statistics tell us about those two situations? What's more likely statistically?
I couldn't answer that, yeah. Statistically, I don't have those statistics. I could tell you that every single day or every other day, it's a regular basis. We're dealing with mental illness now. We're confronted with it on a regular basis. So how that would translate into the school, I couldn't say.
Okay. Thank you. If I have other questions, I'll let you know.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. We're going to go over to our ringer now. For those of you who don't know, Mr. Valenti has decades of experience in law enforcement. He's a retired law enforcer, so his questions might be slightly different. I just want everybody to be aware that, again, he has decades of experience in law enforcement. Mr. Valenti, did you have any questions?
I think that the chiefs really summed it up and followed up on the superintendent's remarks. Thank you. Thank you for the color. I just want to try to add a little value to Mike's question, Mr. Ryan, my colleague. I think that it would be a great convenience for law enforcement if these incidents were so clear-cut and we had, you know, lines that were drawn and statistics that existed that we could pull from in every case to allow us to make a decision. But unfortunately, that's not the nature of law enforcement in many cases. These are incendiary incidents. And certainly with mental illness, you never know what you're dealing with. So just to support what the chief said, I think that is an excellent response, and I think it's extremely credible, and it gives me a comfort level, you know, all around based on our continuing discussions, the discussions with the superintendent, the board members, and thank you. I know it's a major concern for all of us here in the community, including myself. I have a 15-year-old daughter at the school, and I had some dialogue with her last night, and I asked her what she thought about having uniformed police officers in the school, and she was ambivalent. Quite frankly, she didn't think it was a bad thing. She said it was okay. I spoke to some students here today, 4 boys, all seniors at the school, and they all gave me a very positive response. They thought that it would be good to have a uniformed police officer in the school. It actually said it gives them a comfort level, and it was good to hear that kind of feedback. So thank you, and thanks for coming this evening and helping us.
I think I might have misunderstood, Mr. Ryan, what you were asking, but I do have statistics regarding mental illness and these types of incidents. I think that would be important to discuss. The reality is the vast majority of the incidents that were studied, there was 25% or less where there were previous indicators of mental illness where they were diagnosed. And I think all of the studies I have read regarding mental illness indicate that the vast majority of people who are mentally ill do not commit acts of violence. So, if that helps you with
But would
your
you,
question.
would you agree or disagree that the vast majority of school shooters all had mental illnesses?
From the studies, that would be factually incorrect. The act that they committed is a mental illness act, but the indicators before, the FBI did a study, and only 25% of them actually had diagnoses of mental illness. It's very likely they had mental illness and it wasn't diagnosed, or nobody picked up on the indicators. But the reality is only 1 in 4 actually had been previously diagnosed with mental illness.
And who was that?
The FBI.
1 in 4 of what? I'm sorry?
So 1 in 4, or 25%, only 25% of active shooters in the study have ever been diagnosed with a mental illness prior to the incident.
Okay, so I don't want to go back to the slides, but if you look at those instances that Dr. LaSousa put up, you had Columbine and you had Parkland. Clearly, the Parkland shooter had a diagnosed mental illness, as did the Columbine shooters. Is that correct?
I couldn't say for sure whether that's the facts. I don't know that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Arnott?
Gentlemen, thank you again for coming tonight, and congratulations on your recent appointments. I come from a very strange place on this board in that, no, it's not a strange place. I'm strange. I am for gun control. I used to own a gun. I still have my gun permit. I'm against guns. When we first started this discussion after Parkland, when we had, and I can't tell you how many internal meetings the board has had. So this is not something that's come up recently. We've been talking about this for 9 months plus. And I had a very skeptical view. It wouldn't help with anything. It'll raise anxiety in the school. I had visions of metal detectors from Newark, New Jersey, or I shouldn't mention any other school district. That's not fair. But less fortunate school districts, and I had a preconceived notion, and I've done an about-face on that after seeing the research that Dr. LaSousa and the time he spent actually talking to other districts, other law enforcement officials, et cetera. And probably the biggest thing that changed my mind, I was watching my nephew play basketball at the end of last season's glorious season, and I go into the gym, and there's a former police officer whose last name rhymes with Romano, and I go to talk to him because we're friends, and I start talking to him, and it's very strange. I'm not used to talking to him in this setting. And he's talking to me, and his eyes are moving, and his eyes are moving everywhere, okay? So I instantly felt extremely safe because I saw what a seasoned professional, how they see things differently than I see things, or that someone in the office would see things. And if anyone knows this Mr. Romano, from walking into the school, you couldn't find a more affable, gregarious, warm and fuzzy human being to present a positive face on the role of police officers in community policing. You just couldn't pick a better one. So I have one question for you. It's not a question, it's a request. Please work with Dr. L'Souza and the appropriate administration so that we move forward and bring in people who are very much like Mr. Romano.
Lotta, Mrs. Kenny.
Thank you for coming in tonight. I just wanted, if you could talk us through the performance, the annual performance evaluation process that these officers will be going through, and the inputs that you may be giving back to, the inputs that we'll be able to give, and the information that you'll be able to share back with us.
Well, our policy will have to reflect our current accreditation standards that we have to meet. In addition to that, Chief Gibbons and I have discussed a weekly report that they would have to submit, which we would share obviously with Dr. L'Souza and principals at the school. And you know, as far as the performance evaluation, that's something that we would have to pretty much start from scratch, as long as it fits into our current accredited policy.
I echo that exactly. So we have mandates from accreditation to perform evaluations on all personnel. They would be included. All of the standards that apply in accreditation apply to special law enforcement officers or Class 3s, so they would be subjected to the same degree of standard that we hold some of the 20-plus year veteran officers. And what makes me feel a little more comfortable, because just so you understand in the room, I struggle with this myself. So I have 3 children, and I struggle with the idea of having full-time police officers in school. And I think it's important to note that, you know, if it's right for the community, it's right for the school board and the municipalities, that we will support it. We will do what we need to do. And if that means working with Dr. L'Souza on a regular basis, providing reports, removing someone that's not appropriate for that program, then we'll do that.
The evaluation will be shared with the board or Dr. L'Souza in particular?
That's something I think we may have to look into, whether or not we can actually share that document, because it may be a personnel document.
Okay.
But it's something we would have to just double check with legal before we share it.
Oh, and just.
But certainly input. You know, Dr. L'Souza and the school staff would be there every day working with this officer, so their input would be invaluable as to how they score on that evaluation.
And just as a follow-up, what you had said about other Class 3 officers, does the township and the borough have other Class 3 officers in other capacities now?
No.
No.
No, we do not.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Class 3 officers can only work in school settings, correct? They're
Exactly.
prohibited
That's correct.
from working in any other setting.
But I thought you had said that there were other officers that, maybe I misunderstood.
The
what you had
evaluation.
said.
So all of our officers go through evaluations, and they would go through the same evaluation process that all of the other officers go through.
Okay,
But we don't currently have any other
don't.
special law enforcement officers.
okay.
Are you good, Lotta? Or,
Yes.
I mean, if something comes up, we're not done. Mrs. Ciccarelli, or are you still jet lagged?
I'm a little jet lagged, but that's okay. Thank you for being here. Congratulations to both of you. Just 2 quick questions. I don't know if I missed it. Hopefully I didn't in Mike's presentation because I was a little late coming from the airport. But the hiring process of these officers, I understand they are employed by the district, correct, but report to the chief of police. Am I correct? Or employed by the chief? How's that
No,
all
you have
working?
it. They're actually employed and operate under the police department.
Okay, got it. So as far as the hiring process goes, will you be doing any due diligence with the school or with Dr. L'Souza or the principals in terms of, I don't want to say what type of people they're looking for, but kind of that's what I mean, during the hiring process?
Yes, we're going to recruit the right fit for the right school.
Got it.
And with the help of Dr. L'Souza and any other personnel that he wants to bring on board, You know,
Right.
it's got to be the right fit for the right school.
So yeah, as long as it's a collaborative, right. And then my other question is, I know that you mentioned that, I think Jill mentioned that, for instance, the Class 3 officer in the borough is limited to the scope of the borough, and the same with somebody in the township. If in fact there were to be an incident at a borough school, could a township Class 3 officer, they cannot, but a township police officer could if the borough requested that? Got it. Okay. It's kind of all the questions. Thank you.
Excellent. Ms. Clark?
Okay, thank you very much for being here tonight. I understand that these Class 3 officers would be under the jurisdiction of the police departments, but I do want to make sure it is clear that these officers will be funded by the school district's operating budget. So I would hope that there is, during the hiring process, during the evaluation season, that there is a partnership that is very well developed, formed, and consistent with our school district. Because in other towns that were listed up here, many of these towns are sharing resources. They are coming and partnering, the municipalities and the school districts are sharing the cost of these officers. That is not the case here. So I would hope that if this is to go forward, that relationship between the school district, because this is a shared relationship financially and with your leadership as far as law enforcement. The other thing leads me to, although we are two municipalities, we are one school district. So I want to make sure that the consistency between the two departments is clear, that these officers, if they are to come to our schools, that the expectations of them are united, that they're consistent, although they are from the township and the borough, that they are speaking the same language to our kids, they're setting the same tones in our schools. We are one school district, two municipalities, one school district. And then the last thing, and you may or may not have an answer, but I would hope that if we are to move forward with this, that we do reach out to neighboring school districts that do have Class 3 officers and inquire as to how, and maybe you've done this already, how have these officers been introduced to the community, to the schools, to the staff? My hope is that it's not going to be that they just arrive on site on a Monday, that there is some process by which these individuals are introduced so that there is a comfort level and that their role is clearly defined, that no student at the high school or the middle school feels, if they've had an infraction of some nature along the line, that they're going to be targeted, or, that everybody has a clean slate. They're coming with clean eyes here to protect our schools, and that's the role. So you certainly don't have to answer that. You might have that information from neighboring towns and fellow chiefs in the area, but those are not necessarily my concerns. I have definitely grappled with this. I work in a school every day. I never in a million years when I started teaching thought that this is where we would be, but this is where we are, and I believe schools need to be safe, and I feel like we have a responsibility, at least I feel as myself as a board member, to make sure that our schools are the safest that they can be. And for back and forth, many conversations, we as a board have been talking about this, and our conversations have been heated. They have been long, and this conversation has not just arrived here. And that's kind of where I'm at. You don't have to answer my questions, but I want you to hear one school district. We are, we don't get funding from the municipality, so I really want a very united, very cohesive partnership between the school district, the borough police department, and the township police department, should we move ahead. Yep.
I
Thank
think
you.
that already exists, actually.
I don't
Our goal
doubt
is to
that.
just improve it.
But just in terms of having two new employees in a very different role.
Absolutely.
I think consistency and communication has to be unified. And that's
Absolutely.
just-
Much
Thank
agreed.
you.
Excellent. If I could just clarify the scope of what we're talking about here tonight, just so that everybody's on the same page. What Dr. LaSousa is requesting and recommending is moving forward with hiring 2 Class 3 officers. So that's what the board is asked to consider tonight. And when we say move forward, there's no formal resolution on the agenda, because that would entail what we call a shared services agreement, where we write a check to the township and the borough, and the chiefs and the municipalities go off and do their thing. So I just wanted to clarify, the scope tonight is just to give a recommendation to Dr. LaSousse and the chiefs to move forward. That could take several months, and I don't want to put an artificial time frame on it because it will take as long as it takes for the administration and the police chiefs to do whatever it is that they need to do. And I'm assuming it'll take weeks to months, and again, no artificial time frame. So we're not talking about bringing an entire SWAT team. We're talking about 2 individuals to cover, one in the borough and one in the township initially anyway. And Mr. Arnott brought up a good point. I just wanted to clarify, this particular board has been talking about this every meeting since February. I don't mean to put Dr. LaSousse on the spot, but since he's the only employee that actually works for the board, I'm going to anyway. How long have you personally been talking about either a school resource officer or, in this case, a Class 3 officer in either capacity, as an administrator or as a building principal?
For just about as long as I can remember. So I glanced at a PowerPoint presentation that Mr. Groh and Mr. Ronda and I gave in 2006 to Chatham Township officials, because we were high school-based administrators, where we formally requested a school resource officer at that point. So it's been at least a dozen years that we've been discussing this.
10 to 12 years this has come up, and we've been talking about it every single meeting since February. So I know, there's a lot of folks here tonight, and that's great, but some are going to say, oh, why tonight? It's not just tonight. Look back, all the meetings are posted. And as I said, what's interesting is we have every single building represented by the principal staff in the back. They've commandeered the entire back row there. And they know firsthand, what the requirement is and why this recommendation is being made. Does anybody else have any follow-up questions? Oh, Ms. Chambers?
I have a question about substitutes. What happens if a Class 3 officer calls in sick?
That's something we're still trying to work out.
Okay.
As of now, it looks like it would probably be uncovered for the day.
Okay.
Because to have a substitute fill in, it's probably impractical.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Because they are part-time employees. That's my understanding. Yeah. Are there any union issues that we should be aware of, given that they're part-time?
No.
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 They're going to be outfitted as per protocol and all of that?
Yeah, the statute dictates how they're outfitted and how they're used to a great degree.
Okay.
And the reality is we're not allowed to use them for any other purposes. So just so everybody understands, this is not a situation where we can use the Class 3 one day in school and then the next day they're out on a parade. That can't be done. So essentially, with the exception of all of the resources that officer would manage and provide for the school district, we would just be managing that, frankly, and making sure that it's being done properly, but we would not be able to use the officer in any other capacity.
And if we were to employ these Class 3 officers, would the standard protocol for the existing officers on your forces maintain their rotations through the school on the same
yes,
kind of
and
schedule?
I want to be very careful what I speak about when it comes to
You don't have to tell
how
me
we
when,
manage,
it's
but
the same schedule,
we
what they do.
we would be implementing some policies that would change a bit how that response happens and when exactly that response would happen to make sure that we have things covered appropriately with the Class 3 special. So there would be some changes, but I'm not comfortable discussing those.
No, of course I wouldn't want details because we need to keep that. But I just want to
But
make
we
sure
would, yes, they would continue to
you'll
be
still have your
yes, that's
officers
going
come
to
through
continue to
on the
happen,
regular
yes.
basis as well as our Class 3s.
Absolutely,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you.
And that's the distinction between a school resource officer who is a patrolman, active patrolman, twice as much money, but they can go in and out of the schools, they can write a ticket, they can do whatever they want. A Class 3 only has authority in the school buildings.
The school grounds and coming to and fro, they can perform police services, but outside of that, they cannot, not outside the jurisdiction, and we cannot pull them for any other reason. So SROs could, in theory, be pulled if we
Right.
needed them to provide major assistance at another
Right.
scene. In this case, that would not be permitted.
Right. So SROs are more versatile, but twice as expensive, roughly, And Dr. LaSousse, just so everybody understands, the cost of a Class 3 is about $50,000 a year. So we're talking about $100,000. That includes their salary and then training and uniform.
Yes.
And an SRO is whatever an officer's salary is as he goes up the steps or ranks, correct? Okay. So we're talking about $100,000 in roughly a $70 million budget annually,
Yes.
which we're looking to pay out of operating budget based on the fact that we received additional state aid
Yes.
after our budget was set. Thank you, State of New Jersey.
One more request. If, being that there are districts that have Class 3 officers and have had, I think it would be really important, whether it's from our administration, to go to Q&A. What do you do when they're not able to come to work one day, which is the reality? How are they handling those type of issues? What happens when, but it's, you know, we really need to go, we're not going to reinvent the wheel here in Chatham. If it's happening somewhere else and they've had these officers in place for X amount of months or over a year, I think it would be in our best interest to do our homework, go out there, see what is working, what's not working, how are they handling all these scenarios, and how can we best bring that back into our community if needed to kind of troubleshoot before we have a problem.
And one last comment. Dr. LaSusa, you indicated that the Department of Education and the Department of Homeland Security both recommend either SROs, school resource officers, or Class 3s in school buildings.
Well, that's who issued the joint report. At the training we were at this summer, they used the term SRO and Class 3 interchangeably. So they began the presentation by saying when we talk about SROs, we're talking about Class 3s and vice versa.
Okay. But that was their recommendation.
Yes.
Does anybody else have any additional questions on the board? On this end? No? And you're good? Well, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to answer all of our questions. We, just so everybody knows, we're just going to go quickly through the top of the agenda, and then we get fairly quickly to public commentary. Public commentary is just that. You've sat through enough borough meetings. It's an opportunity for the public to make a comment. It's not going to be a back and forth. It's not going to be a Q&A. If the public wants to express an opinion on something or pay you a compliment, congratulate you on your promotion, that would be fantastic, but it's not going to be a lengthy back and forth. And because there are so many folks that may want to speak, we're going to use the time cards as well. So, of course, you're welcome to stay. I understand if you have someplace to go, your call. So we're just going to move on with the agenda, if that's okay with everybody. We'll move through it fairly quickly so folks can have an opportunity to get to the microphone and we can get to everybody. So, Peter, if you wouldn't mind just going through your business report very quickly.
Sure, just a brief construction update. As I stated at the last meeting, for the high school auditorium, the seats are scheduled to be delivered on October 23rd. That's still the current information we have, and I'm sure the contractor will expedite the installation, so we'll be able to fully utilize the auditorium. On Central Office Addition, the windows have been installed and the water line has been relocated, so that is done. The interior work is ongoing. A portion of the new concrete sidewalk was completed today. Other site work will continue. The gas line still needs to be relocated, and the contractor has set a substantial completion date of November 1st. So based on his ability to achieve that, and the gas line will determine when the district staff can actually move into the building. So more coming up in the next coming weeks. For the middle school auditorium, there is a planning meeting this week, and the architect is currently working on all the bidding documents. If there's no questions, I'll turn it back over to you to continue with the agenda.
Excellent. Any questions from Peter? No. If not, see him after. Just in the interest of time, we're going to keep moving on. Moving on to committee reports. Ms. Kenny for personnel.
The committee has not met. Our next meeting is on October 10th at 5:30. So please mark your calendars because it's early.
Ms. Grant, you agree with that? 5:30? Are we meeting here or up at your office? Okay. Perfect. Curriculum, Ms. Ciccarelli?
We have not met since our last meeting. We're meeting again on the 10th as well at 6:30.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Finance and facilities. We just met prior to this meeting at 6:30. We talked about specifically numbers of participants in athletic programs. Right now we're talking about wrestling because the numbers have dipped. They've been doing some good recruiting, so we may not have to cancel that program depending on if they can get their numbers up. It becomes cost prohibitive to run certain programs for wrestling. If you only have 4 guys, in a weight class, it doesn't really pay. What we're trying to do is partner with Summit. If our numbers still don't get as high as we need them to run our own program, we'll do a partnership with Summit. So that's good news. I hope the wrestling team continues to recruit. We also talk about advertising revenue, maybe selling season tickets to the new auditorium, possibly signage at Cougar Field, so we're still working through some of the particulars on that. We talked about activity fees and how that's working through, and any accommodations that are required for any families that need any special accommodations. The big topic always at finance is health benefits. So we want to make sure that we're probably going to bring in, Sal, correct me if I go off trail here, but we're going to bring in our insurance broker to see what additional plans might be available, cost-effective plans in the shift. So more to follow on that. Sal, if you could lead that up, since you're somewhat of an expert in health benefits. Sad but true. Peter gave a construction update, and just a reminder, we're having the demographer. We hired a demographer maybe 8 months ago or 10 months ago, and that presentation is going to be on October 15th at the Board of Ed meeting. It'll be similar to format in that it'll be right at the top of the meeting, so if you want to come and hear that. And we also will have an auditor's report in November, which I'm sure everybody's thrilled to hear. So November 19th, mark your calendar for that. Policy and planning, Mr. Arnott.
Policy and planning is not met since our last meeting 2 weeks ago. I apologize, I don't have our next date. 10:15, thank you.
10:15, okay, very good. Perfect. Moving on to liaisons, Borough, I do not have anything to report. We're just, other than we're just keeping an eye on any of the development and any construction or any plans that, may impact the school district and enrollment. Township, Ms. Clark?
Nothing to report from the township.
Excellent. Boosters? Tomorrow night here in the media center. Correct, 7 o'clock right here in this room, actually on that side of the room, but right here. Performing arts boosters, Mr. Arnott.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief. Marching band received first place at Roxbury competition on Saturday night, and they received the awards for best music and best overall effects. Marching band will also be competing next weekend at Randolph High School and the following weekend at Hanover Park. One other item to note, auditions were recently completed for the middle school musical Wizard of Oz. Mark your calendar. Performances will be January 31st, February 1st, February 2nd in the brand new spanking new high school auditorium. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Arnott. Ms. Kenny, Chatham Education Foundation.
Yes, registration is begins this Thursday at 9 p.m., which is October 4th, for the 5th annual trivia night, which is going to be held at Fish and Game in Myersville on November 3rd. It sells out very quickly, so please sign up as soon as you can.
Excellent. Thank you. And the event is when? I'm sorry.
November 3rd.
November 3rd. Okay. Registration
starts October 4th.
Okay, perfect. Excellent. Chatham Recreation, Mr. Gilfillan is not here, and PTO District Cabinet?
Oh, I actually know the answer this time. They're meeting on Wednesday at noon.
Excellent.
Thanks, Mike, for sending me the calendar.
So we look forward to a report at the next meeting.
Yes, I'll be there.
Excellent. So I apologize to rush folks through that, because I know there's a lot of people here that want to have some time at the podium and express their opinions on topics that we've talked about. I'd like to make a motion to pass the minutes of September 17th, the public session. We did not have an executive session. Peter, everybody's here? Okay. Seconded by Ann. And just in the interest of time, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Excellent, thank you. So we have our first opportunity for public commentary. Hearing of the citizens during the public comment section of the agenda is an opportunity for any member of the public to be heard about issues which are or not topics scheduled for tonight. To help facilitate an orderly meeting and to permit all to be heard, speakers are asked to limit their comments to a reasonable length of time. Because of the number of folks, we're going to use the cards. Typically, there are 3 people in the audience and only 1 chooses to speak, so we generally don't have a time limit. I mean, we let Mr. Heap talk as long as he wants. So Ms. Clark is going to help tonight. So if you can just please be cognizant and just be, just be considerate of everybody in the room that would like an opportunity to speak. And again, just a reminder, this is not a back and forth. This is an opportunity for you to express your opinions, to, let us know what you're thinking. If you have any comments, feel free, but it will not be a back and forth dialogue. And we do want to give everybody an opportunity to speak. So if you can come up to the podium and introduce yourself and just sign in so we have it on the record. Oh, yeah, and try to, if you can, address the board. This is a board meeting. If you're just going to turn and talk to the audience, then I'm going to step out and get a drink of water. So if you can address the board or the chiefs of police or the administration, that would be lovely. Although if you do turn your back, I do need to get some water, so that might be helpful to me. So if any, I won't be able to hear you. So if you want to just step up, everybody has to go to the podium, and I apologize if you have a fear of mics, but it has to be on camera and be recorded.
I would ask for the sake of time, if there's anyone else besides the two individuals, if you form an orderly line, just so we can just move through it. For everybody's convenience, that's appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Paul Krieg of Chatham Township. First off, I am fully supportive of having an armed police presence more active within the schools. As a Chatham Township taxpayer, I understand that regardless of how that's done, it comes out of my pocket. That being said, I think it's incredibly intransparent how this has been handled. It has not been minuted in any of the prior meetings, and it was extraordinarily lightly touched upon in all the communication. There was much communication about a, quote, presentation on public safety. It was not the school board will recommend or not whether we will make a fundamental change to the budget of the school district, where the school district will incur a policing expense to perpetuity, which will fundamentally increase the policing budget. I do not understand how we can be here for an hour before the fact that the school district will bear that cost gets floated by, I think, the 7th or 8th person who spoke. The numbers were extraordinarily round. There was no discussion of any ancillary costs, including any knock-on effects on insurance. I think you should be ashamed of yourselves. I came here supportive after an email exchange with Dr. LaSousa. I agree with the goal of keeping everybody safer. I am very happy that you are not considering having rent-a-cops with guns. That being said, you treat government like a joke when you do things like this. You are ramrodding through a fundamental change in the governance of the borough and the township with no notice and no public discussion other than the people who responded to an email about a, quote, presentation on public safety in the schools. I've sat here stewing for an hour and a half, and that's the reason why you can hear the frustration in my voice. I'm glad that you've discussed it since February. I have not seen in any minute where that has been publicly disclosed. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm sorry? Oh, sorry. I'm Julie Diplis. I have 3 kids that are either in the school system or have been through the system. My oldest is at Emory. It's a campus of 18,000 kids. I got a text message from her the other day. She goes, Mom, we're in lockdown over here. I don't know why, but we all received the text, and she said it was the quietest thing I've ever experienced. There was no siren, no nothing, and it turned out that a patient from the VA hospital was out on the grounds, and they weren't sure if he had a weapon or not, be it a gun or anything else. And after a few hours or so, it resolved. And she texted me back, and I asked her, well, how did you feel? How did it go? And she goes, well, you know, I don't know what the police presence is on campus. I do see policemen here and there. I like that the system got right to us kids because we pay attention to texts, okay? That's the way to get them. And it also, you know, it's almost subterfuge. You know, it's like it's going on, but it's not going on. People continue about their business. It's all done in that kind of way. It was successful. Having said that, I had a few questions because this was informative to me, and I came out with the idea I would ask questions, but I get the parliamentary procedure, and that's okay. I just wanted to say that if the recommendations are coming from like Homeland Security and a state reporting agency, it seems to me that this is a government issue, and SRO adoption is, why isn't it made like a statewide initiative? Why is it handled in this piecemeal fashion, district by district? I don't really understand that. I think that all this stuff crosses borders and all the rest of it. And I would like to have seen some sort of cost-benefit analysis in terms of armed officers, however they are, versus the other recommendations coming from Homeland Security and other places, because that's not clear to me. I think there are all kinds of surveillance techniques and things that we could take, we could learn about and know about and do that cost-benefit to see what is better bang for the buck. And so the bottom line for me is that kids are stakeholders, parents are stakeholders, and I know that there is not a consensus on this board as to whether this is a good idea or not, and I think that the audience is the same. And as a result, I feel like it's not an administrative issue. It should be something that should be voted on, and the kids should be part of that because it's their safety. We think, some of them say, I feel safer. Some of them say, I don't feel safer. Some of them are very curious. They should be part of the process. And finally, I really like the idea of a dedicated officer on a campus as an intel person. I'm not sure that requires a gun. And I will tell you, I've been robbed in the township, and the response time from the township police department was outstanding. They were right there. So for me, having to have someone with this whole issue of gun on campus, for me, that's another variable I don't want to deal with. But I think that there is something to be said about an intelligence presence and how that would work with everybody there. Questions for later. Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Melissa Murphy, and I live in the township. I have a son in elementary school at Washington. The recommendation is obviously for 2 officers within the township and borough. I understand that. We've got 6 schools, so we're talking about 2 people trying to cover 6 different schools. And I guess my only thought is, if you have some type of emergency situation at Southern Boulevard and that officer is currently at a different school, what's the response time going to be like? And are we back into a situation where we have similar response times to as if you're calling 911 because that officer is not on duty at that point in time? So that's just a concern that I had, or a question, I guess, to raise. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Rosella Clyde. I live in the borough. I'm an educator. I've been an educator for 50 years. 42 of those years were spent in New York City public schools. The last school that I was involved in was the High School for Law Enforcement and Public Safety, which was a magnet school, and our goal was to recruit young people to participate in the criminal justice address network. So our number 1 partner was NYPD. So we had a really nice relationship, and I was the instructional specialist for that school. So I had a really nice relationship in developing that school. But our goal and our purpose in that school as a magnet school was to attract a group of students who had an interest in a career in law enforcement, and then to build that capacity and that interest. At the same time, we had school security officers who were employed by the police department, and we had many, many problems where the school security officer was operating on one protocol, and the administration didn't have any authority over that person. So I highly, as I'm sitting here listening to all the comments, it sounds to me like this is almost a done deal, like everybody thinks this is a great idea. I think it's a terrible idea. I am totally opposed to spending $100,000 of educational funds for the hiring of these people that, exactly as the last person said, you have 2 people and 6 buildings. It doesn't make sense. It's optics. It looks good. We're doing something to protect people. We have excellent police forces in both the township and the borough. They respond beautifully to situations. But when Chief Gibbons mentioned the word intelligence gathering, all of a sudden my heart squeezed, and I'm saying, that's the job of educators. And as a professional educator, I was very, very pleased to see a number of the different situations that already are in place to address student issues, and I'm very, very happy with that. I think that in talking about going to Yankee Stadium or going to a ball game, it's a very different situation than being in an educational community. An educational community is a community of people who come together on a regular basis and build together. They have a sense of camaraderie, which is very important. Yankee Stadium, a football game, is bringing in the random public. You have no idea who they are, what their background is, what their intentions are. You need security at something. You need a police presence at places like that. You need a police presence at a football game, because you have the public coming in, and that is their function. Their function is to address the general public. The function of educators is to create an educational environment within each of the separate learning communities, and so this intelligence gathering, to me, is something that those mental health professionals who are employed in the school district should be responsible for. Thank you very much.
Good evening, Tracy Ness from Chatham Township, and thank you to the officers coming out tonight. Congratulations. I think this is a difficult topic, and I think that you all are doing your best to work through all of the issues, and certainly Dr. LaSousa is a very thoughtful person when it comes to discussing these things, and coming at them from both a philosophical and a practical standpoint. I do think it was a terrific point that was just brought up about stakeholders. I think the presentation that we had in the spring about the mental health issues and bullying, the district bullying report and the mental health issues that were going on, that were being self-reported by students, was enlightening and unnerving. And my concern is that I've heard anecdotally, hey, I talked to a few guys and they're like, great, we think that police are, great to be in the school. I love the idea of community policing. I love the DARE program, and the other programs that we have in place. But I'm concerned that without polling, as we did for this survey, students on this specific issue, and asking them specific questions. How do you feel about a police presence in the school? Does this increase your anxiety, decrease your anxiety? Does it affect the way you approach your school day? Does it affect the way that you interact socially with people? I think it would be a tremendous value add if we took that time to consider the students seriously as stakeholders throughout all the schools where it's going to be, and get their input and not just have anecdotal input, because I think that would be probably as enlightening and hopefully not as unnerving as the district report was in the spring. I was surprised to hear that they're part-time. I know we can't ask questions, but that makes me question the efficacy of having a part-time Class 3 officer then spread amongst the 6 different schools. So in terms of response time and in terms of how they could get there, because we know both our township and our borough police are extraordinarily effective in responding to emergencies. But I'm just wondering what the efficacy is of a part-time Class 3 officer spread amongst 3 schools, whether that indeed becomes an optic situation that we have a police presence, but whether it's actually the most effective use of the dollar spent. And I thank you for your time on this topic.
Robert Penn, Chatham Borough. I'm going to be a little redundant. The board knows my background, but just so people out here understand, I'm a disciplinarian in a middle school. I would rather not say which one because I'm speaking for myself, not them. Prior to being an educator, I'm a retired fire captain. This education is my second career. I've been an instructor at the Police and Fire Academy for over 20 years. I was accepted into the doctoral program for Homeland Security. I did 2 years worth of coursework and research. Unfortunately, I had to withdraw from the program because of family illnesses. I am on my district's school security team. I'm one of their advisors, and I'm also a Promise leader in the Sandy Hook Promise program. I respect Miss Clyde, I believe is her name. I respect her years of service. But saying that educators do this, police officers do this, mental health professionals do this, in the research it's called the silo effect, where the overlap is gone. It has to be a holistic approach when you're approaching school security. So if you try to take one out of the occasion, you're severely hampered. There are school resource officers in the school that I teach in. It's an urban school district. 75% are either African American or Hispanic. We're very sensitive to the idea of police presence in a school. When I was a classroom teacher, I've known some of these kids literally all their life since they were 5 years old, and I can talk to them and get an honest opinion from them. And when I mentioned to about on and off, like I said, as a disciplinarian, I get to talk to them on a different basis. And when I asked a couple of them about how do you feel about a police officer in the school, how do you feel about Officer, I'm going to say Jones for lack of a better, yes. I said, how do you feel about him having a gun? The response was basically the same, but one student put it really well. He looked at me, he said, he's a cop, why wouldn't he have a gun? So they're comfortable. The students in our school are comfortable with the school resource officer. Again, their value is the things that don't happen, the things that they intervene in. As I said in the last meeting, if active shooter, if I listed importance, or not importance, but where their effectiveness is, what they actually do, active shooter would probably be number 20 on a list of 1 to 20. There's so many other things. There's so many reasons, so many things that they've intervened in that's of value to the school that if you were hiring them strictly to prevent an active shooter incident, I would say that you're wasting your time. But they just have so much value in so many other ways. Yes.
Good evening. My name is Diane Politano. I reside in Chatham Borough. I've raised 3 children in the school district. My youngest is currently a senior in the high school. I also have the pleasure of serving as a substitute teacher in the district for the past year. And I have to say that I love when I'm here and I see a police officer in the school. It makes me feel safer. It feels like I would have someone to go to if there was an issue with the school. I know my child feels safer with the security guard at the high school. He has a good relationship with him. They feel comfortable with him being here. And the children always seem comfortable whenever there is a wonderful police presence in all the buildings. And I think that any money that is spent out of the budget is worthwhile to protect our children. I wish there was going to be one at every school, and I would hope that in the future you would have an officer at each school so there wouldn't be an issue with having to respond from the middle school to Washington Avenue or to Milton, for example. And I think the amount of money that the school district spends on sports, performing arts, I think that this is a ridiculous commentary that this is too much money to be spending to protect our children. You want them here, you want them to be safe. That's the most important thing. So thank you, and I'm totally in support of your recommendation. Thanks.
Talking right at the same time. My name is Laura Jones. I'm a Chatham Borough resident. I want to thank everyone. I think we're all here tonight because we all want our children to be safe, and I want to thank everyone's efforts in this room that have spent so much time and energy into doing so. I'll just say my perspective from listening to Dr. Lusousa's very thorough and thoughtful analysis. One thing that struck me was that the tactical advantage of being in a hallway, and it just seems like a very manual solution. 2 people across 6 schools when there's so much technology available. And Jill, when you were Miss Weber, I'm sorry, not sure how to address you. When you mentioned it's $100,000 and $70 million budget, to me that it's not about the money. It's saying, can we invest in technology and infrastructure? And I know my daughter sits in a classroom where her back is to a window every day, and no armed guard sitting anywhere in that building is going to protect her if bullet goes through that glass. And so those are the things I think about when I think about, outside of every other debate that's for discussion tonight, guns aside. It's just really a cost-benefit analysis. How can we be spending this money to make sure the maximum amount of children are safe? And a 1-to-1 or a 2 to 2,000 ratio to me just doesn't seem statistically significant. And I'll also just touch on the other issue, which would be about the stakeholders and also just having some facts in place around emotional security and psychology. We can poll students. There's many studies that show that teenage brains are not mature in the way, and I don't mean mature, I mean decision making, all of those things. Can we consult school psychologists? Can we do a meta-analysis on, and again, focus group of one. When I go to Penn Station, in and out of Penn Station, and I see people with guns, my immediate reaction is, get me the hell out of here. This place is not safe, and I don't want to be anywhere near here, and I don't want my kids to feel like that at school every day. So thank you all, and I trust that all of the experience in this room will get us to some great solutions that'll keep the maximum amount of kids safe. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much. I'll write and sign too. My name is Jennifer McNally. I'm in the township, and I have 2 kids in the school. And congratulations on the promotions, and thank you all for being here tonight. And I just want to say, I grew up in Miami, and I went to a public high school with 2,700 kids. And back 30 years ago, we had a school security officer who I believe at the time was armed, and there was no threat to the students there ever. There was nothing, you didn't feel like walking through Penn Station. It was a very amicable relationship between the officer and the students. It was a very large school, a lot different than Chatham, probably, being in Miami. But I just said that was something that had occurred that long ago, so that people were aware of back at that time. But I think one of the things, I had read an article in either the New York Times or the Washington Post about the boundaries of these relationships that had come up a few weeks ago. I'm pretty sure it was the New York Times, about relationships between the students. A lot of students can become dependent. People, like women before me just said, they're very emotional, right? High school students are not some more mentally dealing with situations. They became dependent on some of these officers in the schools. I think we need to define these boundaries very closely and watch them, and be very clear on what they are. And the article did highlight some other inappropriate relationships that came up too. So I think one of the things to be sure of, a school officer, safety officer in the article had a private office, and the conversations there, so that these relationships are out in the open, and that I'll find the article and send it to you. It was either the New York Times or Washington Post. But that would be the thing. I think making sure that the boundaries of the relationships are very clear, that things are out in the open, because you're bringing somebody into the school who typically isn't part of the school population right now. I think the other thing is important, and Jill, if you want to get a drink now, is that we're all here, and we're parents, and we want to be a partnership, and we want to work together to make Chatham really safe. And one of the things we can do is that we're talking about schools and guns and things like this, is that there are groups out there, Moms Demand Gun Sense, or different things. When you go to vote, look at who's out there looking at safer gun rules and things like that. So one of the things, it's mental health, it's different laws that are out there. We as voters can go out there and help to change this too. So is it working with the school? It's working all together as a community to make this better, and really sort of thinking through the processes and how we go about making these decisions so we can partner together. So thank you so much. I'll take your sign-up sheet.
I think you talk faster than I do. And any additional public commentary on this particular topic? There's another opportunity at the end if something strikes your fancy. Going once, going twice. Okay, so I'm going to close the public commentary section for now. Before we move on to the regular agenda, I was hoping Dr. Dr. LaSousa would be able to respond to a couple of those items, or the police chiefs, if possible. I think Laura, you had mentioned that, we should do something about the physical hardening of the building. Security, we've always talked about for several years, is three-pronged. It's, hardening the outside, the buildings, locking the doors, man traps, metal detectors, cameras. We've been working on that. That requires quite a bit of capital expenditure, and we've been spending thousands and thousands of dollars on that, and we have a hit list and continue. Each man trap would cost roughly $500,000, Mike? Is that the?
No, it was less than that.
Less than that.
Between 50 and 100, depending on the building.
Okay, so we do chip away, and it, can we lock down 67 doors in man traps? Probably not. But the board has been attacking this in a three-pronged approach: mental health, physical hardening, cameras, things like that, and personnel. We're now at the personnel part. So it's not that we're just thinking that there's one silver bullet. Doesn't exist. We're just tactically taking and picking at each one. Dr. LaSousa, if you don't mind talking about somebody mentioned it's just optics. And it's, one person for 3 buildings. We don't have anybody now. Would you like to comment on the optics on that? And then I'm also going to ask you to comment on one more item.
Well, I think Chief Gibbons touched on this earlier when he said that response time is improved when an officer is on site. I think that would be the case regardless of what having an additional officer in the district, regardless of where that person is located at any given moment, would be helpful in terms of response time. It's true that we would have 2 officers as this first step employed in the 6 schools if this recommendation is approved. Other districts are doing that. In other words, they're moving incrementally, or they are putting an officer in every school building. And some are putting more than one in each school building. I was on the phone with a different superintendent earlier today who was doing that. So it's incremental. I think it's the first step in introducing police officers full-time, as opposed to how they're in the schools now, which is not on a full-time basis. And I also just would mention that, and the chiefs can speak to this more specifically than I can, but when the law initially was drafted, there was language about being part-time. School districts are employing these folks on a full-time basis because the school day and the length of school year is short enough that it doesn't accumulate over time into a full-time position. So at least the other school districts that are doing this, most of them, are employing one officer, for example, full-time at school X, and they're not cobbling together several different people.
Stated back that there was an article on NJ.com back in March stating that these Class 3 officers can work 35 hours a week in a school district, which makes them, that's why they consider them part-time, although they're not part-time during the school day. They are a full-time employee during the school day, but that they can work up to 35 hours a week in a school. Is that correct? Still, do you know?
That is correct. And it has to do with the offering of benefits.
Right.
So typically,
Right, so they're not part-time to us. They're full-time to us, but they're
correct.
part-time
But
as far as.
technically, it would be for us. It would be full-time temporary.
Got it.
Because they're appointed year to year.
Right.
So that.
And they get school vacations like we have school vacations
That's
and
why
those
they can
kinds
work
of
the
things, right.
35 hours. Typically, it's 29 hours.
Yep.
But with Obamacare and all the other benefit
Right.
we would have to offer them, the 35-hour, because you guys work an abbreviated year.
Yep.
It works out
That's
to
how it
35
averages out.
hours
Right.
per
Okay.
week.
A few people mentioned it. I'm going to pick on Mrs. Ness just because she was one of the last people to talk about it. But Dr. LaSousa, when it comes to the safety and of well-being of our students and our staff, and given the current recommendations of the Department of Education and the Department of Homeland Security, do you believe it's appropriate to bring in students as stakeholders into this conversation, into this dialogue? Do you believe it's appropriate to bring in, stakeholders? From a board's perspective, our job is to ensure that you have the resources you need to run your school effectively. You have the enormous task on your shoulders, and I'm looking at the 3 of you, to keep the children safe. It is your job. We have to make sure you have the resources. You are the experts in the room, and you are making the recommendation. So do you believe it's an appropriate conversation? We have to put out things for budget for surveys. The mental health professional was out for a survey because it was an increase to the budget. So we needed authority from the public to fund that. In this instance, it will be funded through the operating budget because we received additional state aid after our budget was set. So did you want to weigh in on the appropriateness of a survey or stakeholders or anything to that nature?
Well, I would just say that when it comes to personnel matters and when it comes to the safety of students, my job is to make recommendations to the board. I can't employ someone without the board's approval. We have implemented all matter of safety and security recommendations over the past decade. And those recommendations have been informed by local law enforcement agencies or the county or some other entity. And at the end of the day, it's my job to make recommendations like these. And I don't need to survey or poll our students for every recommendation that I make or every type of decision that I am confronted with when it comes to school security or personnel for that matter. So this is a decision that comes about by consulting with experts, by talking with other school districts, by going to training, not just this summer, but almost every year that I can remember, I've been to training about either bomb threats or the role of the threat analysis, where all kinds of stuff that I and principals and other administrators attend all of the time. So I feel very comfortable with this recommendation. I think that we're actually behind most other school districts. I think that we're, like I said, in a minority in terms of being a school district with a high school without a full-time police presence. And I think this is, to be perfectly frank, overdue.
Can I make a comment, Joe? Oh, yeah, please. I was going there next. And if there's any other topics you want clarification, please feel free to ask.
Sure, and I'm a volunteer, an unashamed volunteer, okay? And I appreciate the way that the vast majority of the public weighed in on their viewpoints, pro and con, no matter which way they came down. But at the end of the day, Teddy Roosevelt gave a speech a long time ago called The Man in the Arena, or maybe it was called something else. But I'm not going to quote it. I actually have it on my phone in front of me. I could read it, but I'm not a great orator. It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man, and this should say woman as well, who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. And basically that's a fancy way of saying that it's your in the sling on the line. Okay? At the end of the day, if we hire Class 3 officers, 3 years from now, nothing happens, there's going to be folks who say, see, that money could have been spent for or for Y or for Z. God, I hope that's the case. Okay? But damn it, if I were in your shoes, listening to all the expert testimony that you listen to, talking to the people that you've spoken to, going to the seminars that you've spoken to, and charged with and paid for not only educating our students and taking care of the staff, but first and foremost protecting them, God damn, if I had expert opinion, I think I might weigh that a little bit more heavily than students. God bless them. I want their input too. I want them to feel good. I have children with anxiety. But I'm sorry, you're the man in the arena. And this is your call, and it's your on the line, and I respect that. So I'm not ashamed. I'm not ashamed for talking about this for 9 months. For 9 months, where in public session we asked for more people to show up at these meetings. For 9 months.
That guy left, by the way.
All right.
You can keep yelling, but the fact
I feel
that
like
he
Bill
left-
O'Reilly. Let's do it live.
I mean, there's 3 people in the room for years, but that gentleman that you're speaking to left, as is typical.
Could I just say one thing?
Certainly, Mr. Ryan.
In terms of the stakeholders, would it serve the community well to have these type of discussions in a different setting where we can, or you can have questions asked and answered to the public, like a town hall or something like that?
Well, that's up to you to determine how you want me to interact with the public or how you want to interact with the public. I've been talking to parents about this for years, not at every meeting, obviously, and no, at PTO meetings, at meetings where I'm, the person in the room after an event like Virginia Tech or Parkland or any of these other, terrible tragedies. I guess what my answer is, I don't need to do that to issue the recommendation that I think is right. I'm happy to do that every day that you want. And I can go to whatever school or any venue at any time, and I'll answer the questions as best I can and give the same answers that I would give if we were here in a setting like this. But I don't need to do that in order to issue the recommendation that I think is best.
Thank you. Ms. Clark?
I think in terms of looking at this, and I come from a different perspective being a teacher and being in a school, and until you have been in a classroom, locking down a classroom on a drill with a group of students, it puts yourself in a different place. And there's never once that I haven't sat through a lockdown drill with my students to think or say to myself, what would I really do? Like, what would we really do? And if I know, as a board member here in Chatham, where I have one daughter who's graduated, 2 that are currently in the system, and all of your children out there, if I know that there is a way that we can maybe do something else, just something else, and maybe right now it might not be the ideal solution, but in the back of my mind, knowing that we can do just something else that could possibly prevent the loss of life or get a response time faster, then I would myself would feel it would be irresponsible not to. The second thing is, when we start doing lockdowns, kids are uncomfortable. When we first started doing them, nobody likes them. The kids are not comfortable doing them, but it's become a part of the reality of schools now. This is part of what happens in our schools, and kids are now not as uncomfortable. They're taking them seriously. They're informed, and they're becoming, I hate to say the word more comfortable, but they're not as afraid when they happen, because it's a way that we can help them to be better prepared in a bad situation. Having, in my opinion, another layer of security or protection would also eventually, for some children, they'll be comfortable right away, because those are those kind of kids. For some kids, they're not going to care, because those are those kind of kids. They're just going to get on with their day. And for some of our students, they're going to be uncomfortable. And that's where their teachers, the support staff, the psychologists, the administrators are going to have to look out for those kids, and we're going to have to work through, just like we would in another situation, any situation where a kid is struggling. And we will make sure, and that's why I originally asked the question, how are we going to introduce, if we are going to have these officers, how are we going to introduce them to our students? What is the plan? What is it going to look like? We don't know yet, but I can assure you, a year from now, if these individuals are on staff in our district, I would believe our kids are going to be okay. And I think they're not going to be afraid, and I think they're going to feel safer. And I hope I'm right.
Any other questions for Dr. LaSousa or the chiefs? No? Lotta, you're good? Mary, good?
Jill, I'll mention quickly too. I mean, I think it's inevitable and it's unavoidable that we focus on school shootings, because they're on everyone's mind, and they're so upsetting when they occur. But the reality is, a school shooting is highly, highly, highly unlikely. From my lips to God's ears. But there are other issues that we have that are much more common. We had a student collapse here at our main entrance 10 years ago, and I thought about it because Officer Herchick was here before, and he was the first on the scene. He saved the kid's life. The kid literally would not have made it if the police didn't arrive when they did, and they got here just in time. I've been aware of, in recent years, at least 3 different situations, and I'm sure there are more, but I've been made aware of 3 of them, in which female staff members of ours were involved in relationships that had become violent. And in all three cases, there was law enforcement involvement, there were criminal charges in at least one of them. And we have, every year, we receive restraining orders against parents, or we receive restraining orders against ex-boyfriends. And believe me when I tell you, if we had a police officer present who had intelligence about some of that we don't necessarily have access to, who's a person to whom we can give the photograph of this person against whom there's a restraining order. Right now, we circulate it among our office staff and our security personnel. But those kinds of things happen regularly in terms of a person who really shouldn't have access either to their own children or to an ex-spouse or ex-partner. And a police officer would be extremely helpful in those kinds of situations. And there are many more examples that I can give, but I'll just mention those. I think it's important not to focus exclusively on school shootings because there are so many other more routine or at least more common challenges that we might face where a law enforcement presence is welcomed by our principals for sure.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Sousa. Final row here. Everybody good? On my left. Mike, Sal, you're good for now. Ann, good. Okay. Thank you again. So we'll talk about this in board business. Is that okay with everybody? Or do you want to talk about it right now and give Dr. LaSousa direction or no direction? We'll pick it up in board business then. We'll go through the agenda fairly quickly just so that everybody can get a flavor for how fun these meetings are each and every week. So now we move on to the regular action items, and just so everybody knows, these are posted every Friday, the Friday before. I know the 3 people that are at the meetings typically know this, but these are posted every Friday, so we read them over the weekend. If something piques your interest, you could either send an email, you can attend the meetings. So if we go through these action items rather quickly, it's strictly because we've seen them for the entire weekend. Without further ado, Ms. Kenny, would you mind moving personnel? And just a reminder, there's an addendum.
Yes, I'd like to move action items A1 to A12 on the main agenda, and action items the change on A1, and then on the addendum, A13.
Second from Ms. Clark. I don't know if you heard that, Peter. Okay, very good. Any additional comments or questions for Ms. Grant on personnel? She's dying for questions over there. Trying to get you involved in the meeting, Beth, as best possible. No additional questions? Peter, would you mind?
Sure. Agenda items A1 through 12, including the addenda item for A1 and A13. Mr. Arnick?
Yes.
Ms. Chambers?
Yes.
Ms. Ciccarelli?
Yes.
Ms. Clark?
Yes.
Ms. Kenny?
Yes.
Mr. Ryan?
Yes.
Mr. Valenti? And Ms. Weber?
Yes.
Agenda items pass 8-0.
Excellent. I'm going to move finance and facilities. I'd like to move action items B1 through B10 in Mr. Gilfillan's absence. Second for Mr. Ryan. There's a few donations to note. One substantial donation from the Lafayette PTO for just over $41,000 for the purchase of a fitness structure on the school's playground. Does that say Ninja Fitness Structure?
It doesn't, but yes. So yes, if it says that, I was going to say Ms. Russo's sticking around. She wants to be sure that this is approved. But our PTOs and parents in general have been so terrific about helping us make our playground spaces entertaining and lively and a place that kids want to go to. And when she told me that this would be an American Ninja Warrior type of course, I'm going to end up bringing my own kids here on the weekends probably because they love. None of us can do a pull-up, but we love watching the show.
I have to ask, Miss Russo called me once because my son played football at recess and it was prohibited. How is this allowed?
We've evolved over time.
This is low to the ground, right? Really low to the ground? Not everything, really. And no, sorry, Cheryl, I got to ask. This is all covered by insurance, right? And I don't mean to make light of it, but well, yeah, that's why I'm not approving it yet. Everybody hold on that one. Okay. There's no water and fire. Excellent. Good policy, Mrs. Russo. Thank you. Oh, there we go. Excellent. And there's another donation from the Lafayette PTO for $8,500 for an awning. So thank you, the Lafayette PTO. Holy smokes, that's outstanding. Does anybody have any questions on the finance and facility? And Peter, this is covered by insurance, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
And I'll report out that our insurance company comes out annually to inspect every playground to
Okay.
make sure that they're safe and up to code.
And you gave them a heads up about the Ninja Warrior installation playground?
Not yet. They'll
Okay.
get it once we approve it.
Okay. I know. That's what
what's our deductible on that?
Well, this will be tons of fun. Excellent. Well, thank you. Does anybody have any additional questions on any of the finance or facility items? Again, more to follow on some of the topics from revenue generation. Peter, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. Agenda items B1 through B10. Mr. Arnick?
Yes.
Ms. Chambers?
Yes.
Ms. Ciccarelli?
Yes.
Ms. Clark?
Yes.
Ms. Kenny?
Yes.
Mr. Ryan?
Yes.
Mr. Valenti? And Ms. Weber?
Yes.
Agenda items pass 8-0.
Excellent. Moving on to curriculum, Ms. Ciccarelli.
Yes, I'd like to move agenda items C1 and 2 on the regular agenda.
C1 and 2. C1 we can't talk about. C2. Oh, neither of which we can actually talk about. Okay, seeing no additional conversation. Peter, would you mind?
Sure. Agenda items C1 and C2. Mr. Arnick?
Yes.
Ms. Chambers?
Yes.
Ms. Ciccarelli?
Yes.
Ms. Clark?
Yes.
Ms. Kenny?
Yes.
Mr. Ryan?
Yes.
Mr. Valenti? And Ms. Weber?
Yes.
Agenda items pass 8-0.
Big night for Mr. Arnock on policy. Mr. Arnock, would you move all of your policy items?
I'd like to move policy items 1 and 2 for approval.
Any questions on that? Just for a point, these are all posted on the website. If anybody wants to see any of these policies, you could do a search on them. Most of these get updated based on recommendations from our law firms, whether regulation changes or insurance changes. So a lot of these are recommendations that we just adopt.
Sure, we've actually read through these for at
Yes.
least 3 policy meetings, so this is a second reading.
This is a second reading and, and final
So
adoption.
that's why it seems like we've actually discussed these at a couple of prior board meetings.
Yep. I was just taking advantage of the more than 3 people in the room to explain some of the process. Any additional questions on any of the policies or procedures? Nope. Very good. Peter, would you mind?
Sure. Agenda items D1 and D2. Mr. Arnick?
Yes.
Ms. Chambers?
Yes.
Ms. Ciccarelli?
Yes.
Ms. Clark?
Yes.
Ms. Kenny?
Yes.
Mr. Ryan?
Yes.
Mr. Valenti? And Ms. Weber?
Yes.
Agenda items pass 8-0.
Okay. Very good. So as promised, we're here now at board business. Other than the Class 3 officer item, is there anything else that any board member would like to bring up unrelated to that, so that, because that might take up a little more time?
Yes, on a much lighter note, I'd like to ask the other board members if, as mentioned earlier, the CEF is having the annual trivia night, and if the board would like to have a table, if you could contact me by the end of the week, and I can see that we get us a table.
I don't know. I may have been recruited by a different group, so.
Uh-oh.
I could be bought, though.
But
I'm not
yeah,
proud.
So if
All
you can
donations
email
to the
me
school
if you're
district.
interested, it's November 4th, but
3rd or 4th? 4th?
it's November 3rd, but I have to.
She has to get it in by
October
Yes,
4th.
okay, I'm with you. I hear you. Okay, so see Lotta if we can get a table together. Any additional board business before we jump back over to the Class 3 officer discussion? No? Okay, great. So again, just to circle back, the recommendation of Dr. LaSousa is to move forward with hiring 2 Class 3 officers, 1 in the municipality of the borough, 1 in the municipality of the township. That will take several weeks to several months, so it's not going to happen immediately. Again, there's no formal resolution because there's no shared services agreement, which is what the board would actually be voting on. So what we would like is to hear your opinions and consideration and to give Dr. LaSousa direction to move forward with the hiring of Class 3 officers on that. So again, I'll start with the ends and work our way in. We've kind of touched on it a little bit based on our questions. Sorry, Mary. It's the advantage of seniority. We start on the ends and we work our way in. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Weber.
You're a champ. Thank you.
I I just want to say I have spoken with Dr. LaSousa personally on this, and he has really helped me to understand how we really need to consider this as a Board of Education, as in a community. I think it is definitely something we should pursue. One of the sayings that sticks in my husband and mine's brain since 9/11 is that they only have to get it right once. We have to get it right every day. And I think that's really important. And we have to get it right in so many different ways. It's not just if somebody walks into the school as a school shooter, but like Dr. LaSousa said, there's a lot of reasons. And the professionals are telling us that this is something that we should seriously consider. And I strongly support your recommendation, Dr. LaSousa.
Thank you, Ms. Chambers. Mr. Ryan?
Yeah, this is it's a struggle for me to address this issue. I do have some lingering concerns and questions that have not necessarily been answered yet. There has been a lot of feedback from the public, at least in this meeting. However, I think there should be more. I think that it might be a good idea to delay moving forward until we could have a more formal and proper, in my view, not anybody else's view, more formal question and answer session with the public. I think that'll be beneficial for us as a board. We learned a lot today. We heard a lot today. I think I need a little bit more deliberation myself, considering what I've learned tonight and frankly not knowing that we were even going to vote to move forward tonight on this issue. So, and that's my opinion right now. That could change. You know, I want to see if we get to the point where it's an agenda item on a regular meeting. My vote could be different than it is tonight, but I would suggest that we pause. We are having another meeting on October 15th. I don't think it's going to hurt us to delay 2 weeks.
Thanks, Mr. Ryan. And not to say we won't be talking about it from now until January, but we're going to continue to talk about it. Michael Valenti. Too many Michaels in the room.
Yes. I just want to give a little bit about my background in public safety and policing. I am acting and as a Board of Education member, but like anyone, I can't negate past experience and things that I've been involved with. I was the chief of counterterrorism for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey post 9/11. I spent about 3.5 years sitting on the Joint Terrorism Task Force at the New York office building a counterterrorism program. I managed a $450 million budget, and part of my charge was to enact policies that kept the 1 million people a day safe, the traveling public that went through Newark, Kennedy, LaGuardia, PATH system, Port Newark, Port Elizabeth. And it was a constant struggle on how do we best deploy our resources and how do we keep the public safe and make good decisions. So having said that, and talking about this issue and dealing with this issue and hearing from the community in a different capacity now as a board member, with that in mind, as well as what I've heard and what I've seen and my past experience, I support Dr. LaSousa's recommendation 100%. I don't think that in good conscience, as someone who sits on the board, a person with law enforcement history, as well as a parent, that I could do anything else. So I fully support your recommendation in regard to the Class 3 officers and support the chiefs moving forward in conjunction with you and the community and the board.
Thank you, Mike. Sal, Mr. Arnott?
Yeah, so the comments about more public input, I obviously think we should have a lot of public input, and it's especially important if we're debating a performing art facility or something of that magnitude, that's a little bit of a different issue than one where you're in charge of other people's lives and safety. And I even remember there was years back, a dozen years ago, there was an incident at a church where a priest was murdered in Chatham. And if you polled and listened to the public talking about the rumors, oh, this is what happened, oh, this is what happened, this is what must have happened, this is what happened, I can tell you, I knew exactly what happened and had my mind made up only to be proved wrong. So there's a difference between getting public input and getting expert input. So with that in mind, I respect, we're all stakeholders. I don't have a kid in the system now. My youngest daughter just graduated. We have 3 kids come through the system. I understand that parents are here because their kids are in the system. I get it. I totally get it. Folks on the board get it. Well, you know where I stand. I support you moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arnott. Ms. Kenny?
As many of my fellow board members, I too struggled with this decision. I hate that we're at this point. I hate that we spent so many hours having to talk about this. You know, school should be someplace fun, that they're learning and they are experiencing new things, and they shouldn't have to be doing drills. But this is the world that we're in. It's an evolutionary process, as Dr. LaSouza kind of pointed out in his presentation of how we got here. It's an imperfect world, and I think it's the direction that we need to take. So I also support moving forward.
Thank you, Ms. Kenny. Mrs. Ciccarelli?
I too echo a lot of the sentiments that Ms. Kenny expressed as well. I mean, unfortunately, this is the world we live in, and none of us want to live in an unsafe world. None of us want to see school shootings. None of us want to see unsafe environments for our kids. However, you know, we put our trust in those that know better than we do, and when the Department of Education and the Department of Security and the police officers in our town and our superintendent and our administrators are requesting that they have more safety for our children, I think it would be, you know, out of our scope to say differently. And I think if, you know, we put our trust in Dr. LaSouza, and if this is something that he's requesting that he feels that we need, and that our other administrators and our police force that is out there to protect us every day feels is the right move, I think I would be remiss to not support you. So I am fully in support of what you recommend.
Thank you, Mrs. Ciccarelli. Mrs. Clark?
I think I've already stated where I stand. I fully support the recommendation for Class 3 officers. I hope that if we do bring them to Chatham, that it's not long before that we have Class 3 officers at all our schools, including our elementary schools.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. And Ms. Clark did remind me that the Class 3 officers would work in conjunction with our current security staff that are in each of the 6 buildings. So it's not one is not replacing the other. It's a partnership. So I just didn't want anybody to think that we were getting rid of the red shirts and replacing them with these 3 and they had to cover all 6 buildings. That's not the case. I am also in support of moving forward. Again, there's going to be additional discussion because the chief has mentioned there's quite a bit of legwork now. There's policies to write, there's procedures. You know, there's recommendations for you to make so I assume this will take several months before we even get to the point. So the conversation's not over. We're going to continue to talk about it. And by my count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 to 1. Mr. Ryan said not at this time, but the recommendation of the Board of Education is to proceed forward to hire 2 Class 3 officers. Please, we'll continue the dialogue. If something comes up to say, you know, there's nobody available, we're going to have to circle back, so be it. So it's evolving, as Ms. Kenny said. So the direction right now is to move forward with the hiring of 2 Class 3 officers. Any additional questions or comments on that? Dr. LaSouza, are you clear on, do you have any questions for the board? No questions from the board. Okay, so any additional board business? Oh, sorry, Mrs.
So
Chambers.
we are going to work on presenting to the board the policies and procedures that you want in place to give us a level of comfort. And would you present that to your staff and your administrators as well prior to the final decision to hire?
Yes, well, I'll probably these guys will take the lead because they're the ones that have to develop the policies and the job description and work with their departments, and then we'll stay in touch and draw in the wider group as we need, and then report back to you where we are. But they couldn't proceed down that road until they had an idea that this would be something that we would move forward with.
Okay, excellent. So there's no additional board business. Just a reminder to the board members, we do have an executive session at the conclusion of this, and action will be taken most likely on one item as it relates to Dr. LaSousa. So we have our second opportunity for public commentary. Again, same format. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, signing in, Ms. Clark will keep track of the minutes. Oh, our two regulars. Sorry, you're going to be limited this time. Typically it's have at it, but tonight, if you don't mind, do the hour. We're going to limit the time.
Okay, good evening. Well, I'd like to begin by, in addition to thanking the board and the police chiefs for their time tonight, I want to acknowledge with appreciation the school principals who were in attendance this evening. Thank you. I am a big proponent of involving students in some areas of decision making, and I have both suggested and endorsed this in the past. However, to outsource this decision about the safety officers or Class 3 officers to students or even to us, the lay public, instead of relying on the experts in this issue, and in this instance, the expert is the superintendent who went to volumes of in-services and training, as well as other experts, our police chiefs, would seem short-sighted. So I want to thank the board for what I just heard, for moving forward with the superintendent's recommendation to have the officers. I just want to close by using an example. We might participate in a plan of care if we are a patient with our doctors, but we don't tell our doctor what prescription to write or how to do his or her surgery. So I just wanted to give that outside example. I support Dr. LaSousa and the police chief, the experts' recommendations, and I do not feel a survey or a Q&A session in this instance is warranted, even moving forward. Although in general, I always believe open communication is a healthy thing. And again, I wanted to thank the board for moving forward with the recommendation tonight.
Good evening, Bill Heap, Chatham Borough. I've got a few random comments. First comment is, Ms. Weber, you referred in your talks to something called a man trap. I would just recommend that you, every other time that you say man trap, that you refer to a woman trap, just in the interest of gender equality. Second thing.
Duly noted.
I have, in my 33 years here, there is not 1 minute or even 1 second that I have ever felt unsafe in this town. That's due to these gentlemen here who run the best police department in the state. I understand that I've lost this battle, and I really don't understand the levels of anxiety that are out there. I guess they are out there. As you all know, I work in Irvington. I might as well be in Iraq. So when I come back here, I only feel safe. I don't feel anything else. And I guess times have changed. I am glad that my 2 daughters are out of the system. I wouldn't want them attending a school where there is an armed police officer at the front door. Just my feeling. I think that it might be a good idea to get some public input, but I guess that's going to be up to you guys. One last comment about rhetoric. And here is where I'm going to support you. There has been some heated rhetoric, especially one of the gentlemen who came up tonight, but there was also at the last meeting some discussions about who would be responsible if policies were implemented or were not implemented. Let's face facts. You guys are volunteers. You are doing a job that nobody else wants to do. For that, you deserve our respect. I don't exactly see people rushing in the front door to take your jobs away from you. It is easy for those of us who are in the cheap seats to throw popcorn at you. And I won't hesitate to torture you whenever I get the chance. But there is a line. And I would ask my fellow citizens, there was a gentleman who came up before and accused you of not discussing this. That's not true. I've been to all the meetings, so it may not have been discussed in this detail, but it was discussed. And there was also some rhetoric at the last meeting about who would be responsible, who would be, if lightning struck this district in the form of an event that was beyond our control, and you didn't implement or did implement, you know, to assign blame for these kinds of things is unfair to everybody. And if we started doing that, we won't get anybody to volunteer for anything. So I would ask my fellow residents to, when they are up to at this podium, to show the board the respect that they deserve. Thank you.
Hi, Tracy Ness. I just wanted to clarify my comment previously. My comment about surveying students was not meant to usurp the recommendations being made by the police or being made by Dr. LaSousa. As I referenced the mental health survey, those responses helped us both as a board and a community to make some decisions going forward to help get funding for additional school counselors, psychologists, to help make the argument that we needed this. So in no way was I suggesting that we give over a survey to students to have them make a decision on what's best for them. More so that, as I think Michelle and Lotta and some others had spoke about, guiding policy, as you guys are writing policy, formulating policy, what is the relationship balance between the students and the police? That was really more of the tack that I was going for, which was, how does this affect you? How would you like to have the relationship? Not in any way saying, okay guys, over to you, you make the decision. But as we go through this process, to gain that sort of input, because it was so instrumental in helping to push forward the hiring of additional guidance counselors and school psychologists, and really telling us what that need was, that as we are shaping these policies and building these relationships and building this new bridge that we're going to have in the schools, that they could provide some valuable insight towards that. Thank you.
Robert Penn. I just wanted to make some comments on technology. I just, within the last couple of weeks, read the Parkland Task Force report, and one of the things I emphasize is not placing products over people. The technology is limited. It's only going to be as good as the people who are using it, and it has limitations. So to rely solely on technology, you have to realize when you're dealing with people who are plotting these types of things, you're dealing with crazy, not stupid. And there are ways around virtually every technology. So the benefits of having an officer gathering intelligence, not, like I said, not only about active shooters, but it could be drugs, crime, anything, is far more beneficial than any sort of technology that you can employ. Of course, it's good to have that along with it, but again, an over-reliance on it is not going to be the answer. In terms of the decision you had to make tonight, remember that the popular decision is not always the right one, and the right decision is not always popular.
Any excuse me, any additional public commentary for this evening? No? Okay, I'm going to close the second public commentary session. And again, just a reminder, we have to go into executive session. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Gentlemen on the technology, Shane, Mike, Colin, Mason, thank you again for taking care of you. You guys are doing a great job. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. Drive safely. If you want to come back, we'll probably still be here about midnight if you want to join us.